but more than that, we have to have our own alternatives, our own solutions to crisis, right? There's only so long that you can say no to their austerity. You have to have your own agenda, a positive agenda.
Speaking about the complexity of the issue, there seems to be, especially counter-arguments from climate change skeptics and scientists who say that yes, this is definitely happening. That debate is happening on a scientific level, and for the most part, it's very inaccessible to laymen and voters and the general public. Do you think it's the journalist's job, or the journalist has some form of duty to bridge that gap and make that discourse more accessible?
Well, there's been a fair bit written about the way in which mainstream journalism has legitimized the denier argument just through the convention of a sort of he said, she said, every story has two sides and you have to give an equal weight. But I think that's been pretty successfully critiqued. I see a change just in the past 6 months. I don't know if you would agree, but I think this sort of just the hardcore denialism thing has peaked, and now it is more a animal of the right-wing media, which repeats again and again that this is all hoax and so on. But in terms of mainstream coverage of climate change, just the sort of past 2 years of extreme weather has, I think, changed it a little bit, and now we are seeing mainstream journalists act as if climate change is a fact. They don't need to keep going to the other side any more than you have to keep going to get the tobacco company's point of view on whether smoking causes cancer. I do believe we're getting to that point, and it's just people's experience. It's a few more heat waves and a Frankenstorm, on Halloween. I mean, people realize that something very weird is going on with the weather, and I mean, it's still not nearly visible. In fact, it wasn't mentioned once during the presidential debates, as you all know, which is shocking. It hasn't happened since 1988. So we certainly have ways to go to raise the issue's profile again in the mainstream media, and I'm amazed at the extent to which we in Canada can endlessly debate the tar sands without talking about climate change. I mean, it's shocking how seldom the issue is raised, and I think we need to do a better job of it. In the way we fight pipelines. Yes, it is about the local impact. It's about the impact of the tar sands, in situ. It's about the impact of tar sands to people living downstream. It's about the impact of all the people along the pipeline routes and all the people who are facing the tankers on their coast. But it's also about climate change, and I think we need to foreground that more.
Maybe people haven't had a chance.
Or else it ends up being like, can we make it safer, and all that, and that's sort of what happened with the Keystone XL fight a little bit. It was like, okay, well, the problem is that it's going through the Ogallala Aquifer, and no, that wasn't the problem. The problem was what it was carrying, right? Even if it didn't spill.
So, if the solutions don't lie with the UN Convention, where do you envision them arriving or being created from? I mean, I just saw the take, or a portion of the take, and it highlights the worker cooperatives of Argentina, and it's a struggle, and there is a time frame in how we can react to these influence of climate change, and where do you envision these alternatives, and do you see them coming in time?
Well, I think the UN process can become relevant again, but it's like, but the movements have to be there before that will happen. So it's almost like I see them as a bit of a placeholder. It's important that the process continue, but the question is, what resources should grassroots organizations devote to them, right? Because it's kind of the job of governments to keep that process going, and I think a fair amount of grassroots environmental energy was being poured into the UN process. I'm not sure at this point, given the expense, that makes sense. This is really all I'm saying. Because I do think that we could get to a point where this movement grows strong enough and is enough of a counter pressure on governments in our own countries that that process becomes relevant again. It is the best that we have. and that the process has teeth. I mean, this has been the problem so far, is that we have trade agreements that are enforceable, and if you don't follow the rules, there are actual penalties. Canada is able to make a complete mockery of the Kyoto Protocol and send our emissions up 30%. There's no consequences, so why wouldn't we? So we need to get to a point where we're strong enough that what we're asking of that UN process is much more than we have now. Two more. I need to say a little brain power.
Thanks. Hi Naomi, it's Ethan Cox from Rebel.ca. I just, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois from Quebec gave an extremely good speech, strong speech last night, in which he was very explicit in identifying capitalism as the enemy, and made a quote along the lines of, we either get liberty or we die, and in which he meant liberty from capitalism. So would you be as explicit in saying that our only hope is to take down the capitalist system, to really not reform it, not mitigate it, but to take it down? Not put you on the spot or anything.
They would have always the Haitian Declaration of Independence, freedom or death.
Also some parallels to the American Revolution.
I don't know. I mean, he cited. That's what he said, and that was the Constitution. So is it like overthrow type slavery?
Well, look. I mean, I think that this economic model. I mean, the reason why this movement is necessary is because this is an economic model that is fundamentally at war with life on Earth. And this sounds like a very dramatic thing to say, but our planet's life support systems are in crisis. We are approaching multiple tipping points. So, that might not be the precise rhetoric that I use, but I do believe that it is, that we are fighting for life. Absolutely, that's at the core. And that it isn't about like a single corporation here or there, that it is about a system. And it's a system that dies if it doesn't continue to grow. And that isn't fundamentally able to do anything but what it is doing right now. And Bill McKibben and I are launching a campaign on the day after the U.S. election called Do the Math. And it's calling for divestment from fossil fuel companies on the grounds that it's them or us. And it really is them or us, because if you look at, if you read the piece that Bill wrote for Rolling Stone, which is a summary of a lot of some really great new research out there about the amount of oil and coal that the fossil fuel industry has in reserve right now. We know how much it is, and we need them to keep 80% of that in the ground if we are to have a hope in hell of staying below 2 degrees, which, by the way, is way too much, right? So we've done the math, we've crunched the numbers, and it's not, that we hate you, exactly, I mean, some of us may, but it's actually that we care too much about our futures, about our children's futures, to let them continue with this suicidal model. And it is a suicidal model. I mean, oil companies, in some ways, they are a great microcosm for this capitalist logic of grow or die. Their stock price depends on having as much in reserve as they have in production. So they have to constantly be growing. They can never stop. And so if you add up everything that they have in reserve, what you see is that it's 5 times more than the planet can handle. And that's capitalism. I say miniature, but they're some of the largest corporations on the planet. It's not so miniature, but it is. I think it's a good way of understanding what it is that we're up against, and so I'm really excited about this campaign. It's modeled on the divestment campaign against apartheid, and we are going to many university campuses starting on November. I think Bill's starting November 8th or November 7th, and the demand is for students to say to their campus administrators who are administering their endowments, their university endowments that are all heavily invested in fossil fuels, you tell me, you do the math, and tell me how it is that you can prepare me for a future that you don't believe in.